Dear friends, good evening. My name is Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann, and as president of the International March of the Living, I am most pleased to welcome you to this evening's program in commemoration of the 90th anniversary since the passage of the infamous Nuremberg Laws in Germany. Founded in 1988, the International March of the Living brings students, Holocaust survivors, adults, educators, clergy, and distinguished leaders from countries around the world to Poland to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day. Participants visit once thriving sites of Jewish life and culture, as well as the sites of Jewish persecution. Each year, thousands of participants from a diverse cross-section of the world's demographics join us and march arm in arm with Holocaust survivors along the 3.2-kilometer path from Auschwitz I to Auschwitz II-Birkenau. They do so in memory of all victims of the Holocaust and in a unified statement against the evils of prejudice, intolerance, and all forms of hatred. From Poland, many of our participants travel to Israel, the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. Here they remember Israel's fallen soldiers and all victims of terror on Yom HaZikaron, and celebrate Israel's independence and resilience on Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. Today, the March of the Living is the largest experiential Holocaust education program of its kind, with some 300,000 alumni spread across the globe, working for a better tomorrow. As I mentioned earlier, tonight's program marks a grim anniversary, 90 years since the institution of the Nuremberg Laws, which virtually excluded the Jewish people from all aspects of civil life in German society. As we teach our students on the March of the Living, Auschwitz was not built overnight, my friends, and did not miraculously appear out of thin air. Baseless hatred led man's inhumanity to his fellow man and woman reach unimaginable heights. Please watch this short, moving video, which encapsulates the historical events leading up to and culminating with the passage of these horrendous laws in 1935.
Germany, 1933. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, seizes control of the democratic Weimar Republic. The country is transformed overnight into a police state. Basic rights and freedoms are revoked. The first concentration camps are established, imprisoning political opponents, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Hitler creates a propaganda campaign based on the purity and superiority of the Aryan race. His racist ideology infiltrated every level of society. Jews are labeled as impure and are excluded from mainstream German society. They are randomly attacked in the streets. The Nazi Party calls for a boycott of Jewish stores and businesses. On September 15, 1935, the German parliament passed the Nuremberg Race Laws. The Nuremberg Laws makes racism, and in particular anti-Semitism, legal in Germany. German Jews are stripped of their citizenship. Relations between Jews and non-Jews are forbidden. Jews cannot employ non-Jews.
One of the geniuses of this policy, because it's actually fusing something that's rational legislation with something irrational, which is xenophobia.
These laws set out to deny Jews in Germany their citizenship, regardless of how long a particular Jew had been living in Germany or that person's family. And the laws ultimately defined citizenship in Germany based upon who a person's grandparents were by race. And therefore, anyone who had even one Jewish grandparent could no longer be a citizen of Germany.
Sexual relations between Jews and Aryans is considered a crime because sexual relations between Jews and Aryans obviously violated racial principles and would produce children who would be in some way carriers of the Jewish gene.
The Nuremberg Laws separate the Jews out of German society, and with that a sense of indifference is engendered, which ultimately would lead to, a sense of indifference to the Jewish fate at later stages of Nazi policy.
The idea that Jews are not equal to the rest of the German people, the idea that Jews should not be equal citizens, the idea that there should be a social separation legislated in Germany seemed to be at least unobjectionable to almost everybody else in Germany, and no one spoke out.
The Nuremberg crimes were really the crimes of the Nuremberg elites, judges and lawyers and faith leaders and educators. The society that should have been engaged in protesting against the Nuremberg racism were the elites and the society that in effect were promulgating this hate and promulgating these laws.
When the Nuremberg Laws were passed in 1935, they were not passed, as far as almost all historians now agree, with any intention or any vision of the future that there would be a murder of all the Jews, an attempt at what the Nazis later called the final solution to the Jewish question. However, these laws ultimately served as the foundation for determining all policies against Jews, and that included, as time went on, also killing the Jews.
The rise of Nazi Germany and the Nuremberg Laws are a stark reminder of how marginalization and the denial of basic human rights led to Auschwitz and the murder of millions of innocent people. It is a reminder we fail to heed at our own peril.
We'd now like to call upon our dear friend and our partner, Paul Miller, the visionary founder of the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University in New Jersey, who will introduce our keynote speaker, the esteemed Stephan Kramer. Like the March of the Living, the Miller Center engages in critical programs educating the public on the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred in all its forms. We are honored to once again partner with the Miller Center on this important program in our common goal to impact the global narrative and combat the rampant anti-Semitism flourishing so freely around the world today.
Thank you, Phyllis. 90 years ago today, Nazi Germany enacted 2 laws against Jews in Germany, which became known as the Nuremberg Laws. The first law stripped Jews of German citizenship, and the second law outlawed them from interacting with the German people. These laws, which were later extended to include blacks, Roma, and other minorities, led to arrests, imprisonment, executions, and the horrors we know as the Holocaust. Today's discussion about the Nuremberg Laws by Stephan Kramer, president of the State Domestic Intelligence Service in Thuringia, Germany, is being presented by the International March of the Living and the Miller Center on Policing and Community Resilience at Rutgers University. For many years, the March has been committed to enabling the understanding by future generations of the horrors of the Holocaust and, through this understanding, to combating anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred. The Rutgers Miller Center is committed to working directly on campuses with administration officials and campus police, as well as directly with community leaders and community police to protect Jewish and other minority students and minority community members from discriminatory acts. It is our belief that actions such as these are critical to ensure that what the world said at the end of the Holocaust, never again, will mean never again. Today's speaker, Stephan Kramer, is the president of the State Domestic Intelligence Service. For the last 10 years while in this position, he's been in charge of the agency that collects and analyzes information about extremism, terrorists, and other efforts which pose threats against Germany. Mr. Kramer studied law, economics, and social science and holds both MA and BA degrees. In addition to his position with the Intelligence Service, he serves on various advisory committees for projects against racism and intolerance of civil society and remembrance, and on the International Advisory Board of the Holocaust Museum in Macedonia. He has served as Director, European Office on Anti-Semitism of the American Jewish Committee in Brussels, Secretary General of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, and head of the Office of European Jewish Congress in Berlin. Stephan Kramer also served as a consultant for individual and slave labor compensation funds, an advisor for public governmental relations for the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. And during his time with the Claims Conference, he established and supervised local offices of the Central and Eastern European Holocaust Compensation Fund of the Claims Conference in Chisinau, Moldova, Bucharest, Romania, and Budapest, Hungary. We welcome Mr. Stephan Kramer.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on September 15, 1935, at the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg, the German Reichstag convened for a single chilling purpose: to convert hatred into law. Two statutes, the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor, reduced German Jews from citizens to subjects, forbade marriage and sexual relations between Jews and so-called Aryans, and made ancestry, not belief, conduct, or contribution, the measures of one's rights. Those laws did not appear from nowhere. They were the legal cornerstone of a years-long campaign to strip, isolate, and finally annihilate a people. 90 years later, we remember not only what the Nuremberg Laws said, but how quickly a democracy can be hollowed out when law is weaponized against human dignity. The text of those laws and the decrees that followed spelled out a racialized system with bureaucratic precision. In November 1935, implementing regulations defined a Jew based on grandparents' religious affiliation. People with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents were declared Jewish by birth, irrespective of their own beliefs. Mixed marriage couples were hounded. Race defilement became a criminal offense, and with a stroke of a pen, millions were excluded from full political rights. The myth of German or kindred blood became a passport, one denied to neighbors whose families had lived, loved, and labored in Germany for generations. This was not only persecution, it was education. It taught a nation to see legal discrimination as order and the neighbor as a problem to be solved. Nuremberg would later host the trials that began to repair, however imperfectly, what law had broken. Between November 1945 and October 1946, the International Military Tribunal tried leading Nazis, establishing crimes against humanity and affirming the principle that individuals, not abstractions, are responsible for atrocities. The city in which racial law had been proclaimed became the city that articulated universal accountability, that historical arc matters. It reminds us that law can destroy and law can heal. But laws do not exist in an empty space, never act alone. They are the result of moral choices of citizens, officials, and institutions. Among those institutions, the police played a decisive role. In the 1930s and 40s, the police were not neutral enforcers of order. They were active agents of persecution. German police forces enforced the Nuremberg Laws, monitored marriages, arrested those accused of race defilement, and cooperated with the Gestapo in rounding up Jews, Roma, political dissidents, and many others. The uniform that should have symbolized public service became too often a symbol of fear. It is an uncomfortable truth, but it must be said. The Nuremberg Laws would have been words on paper without a police force willing to implement them. Today, my friends, the situation is fundamentally different. Yes, we face challenges, but the whole framework is basically a different one. The Federal Republic's police, federal and state, are sworn to uphold the basic law, the German Constitution, to protect equal rights and to defend democracy. They are not perfect. Cases of racism, anti-Semitism, or infiltration by extremists do surface, and each such case must be addressed with zero tolerance. But overall, the police are part of the solution. They investigate hate crimes, guard synagogues and mosques, monitor extremist networks, and serve as the frontline protectors of a diverse democratic society. In 2024, when anti-Semitic attacks surged after October 7, 2023, it was the police who increased visible protection of Jewish institutions. When right-wing extremist groups plotted violence, it was the police and domestic intelligence who disrupted those plans. This is a different situation compared with what it used to be 90 years ago. This transformation itself is one of Germany's greatest democratic achievements. It shows that institutions can learn, can reform, and can embody the opposite of what they once represented. Well, once the police enforced exclusion, today their task is to enforce inclusion, to guarantee that every citizen, regardless of religion, faith, or identity, can walk the streets without fear. Such a transformation often needs helpful hands. Let me therefore raise your attention to a program headed by my dear friend Paul Goldenberg, Chief Advisor for Policy and International Policing at Rutgers University. Rutgers University's Miller Center and the University of Virginia's Center for Public Safety and Justice have collaborated in developing a new executive training program called Operationalization Never Again, Not on Our Watch, which equips leaders with tools to address anti-Semitism, bias, human rights, and ethical dilemmas, ensuring that lessons of the Holocaust inform modern policing and reinforce law enforcement's role in protecting democracy and vulnerable communities. This year, both centers led the largest ever global law enforcement delegation to the International March of the Living on April 24, 2025, marking the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation. More than 60 law enforcement leaders from the US, Europe, and the UK, Africa, and the Global Consortium for Law Enforcement Training Executives joined Holocaust survivors and families in this historic event. My friends, it was beyond words. So what precisely is our responsibility at the 90th year mark? First, to understand the present as it is, not as we wish it to be. Across Germany and far beyond it, we are witnessing a resilient ecosystem of right-wing extremism and a new right that blends academic-sounding terms with illiberal goals. In Germany, the Neue Rechte operates with a metapolitical strategy, shifting culture and language first to make exclusion seem like common sense later. Its rhetoric of ethnopluralism claims to protect cultures by keeping them apart. In practice, it normalizes segregation, anxiety, and suspicion as civic virtues. The words may soften the edges, but the core remains hard. Second, to name the tactics, today's extremists often avoid the crudeness of 1930s slogans. They talk of identity, security, and tradition. But the policy proposals converge on narrowing who belongs and on shrinking the circle of rights. In Germany, investigative reporting in early 2024 exposed a gathering near Potsdam where figures from the far right discussed remigration, an euphemism for state-driven expulsions of people with migrant backgrounds, including those who are German citizens. Some present AfD members of parliament even suggested a DNA mass test to identify the pure Germans without immigration background who deserve the German citizenship in their eyes. The revelations prompted one of the largest pro-democracy mobilizations in years, with hundreds of thousands taking to the streets in cities across the country to say, not in our name, not on our streets, and not in our law. Third, we have to face the data. Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service reports that violent offenses committed by extremists rose again in 2024 by more than 23% year on year, driven primarily by right-wing violence. This is not just rhetoric, it is harm. And in May 2025, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution stated it would treat the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, nationwide as a confirmed right-wing extremist organization before suspending the public use of that definition pending a court review. Whatever the legal outcome, it signals that the guardians of our democracy see a serious danger and are testing the limits of the tools we have in the defense of democracy. The danger is not confined to anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is once again a warning light on our dashboard. After the Hamas massacres of October 7, 2023, anti-Semitic incidents surged sharply in many countries. In Germany, the RIAS monitoring network recorded more than 5,000 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, the highest number since record-keeping began, nearly doubling after October 7 compared to earlier months. In the United States, the Anti-Defamation League tallied 9,354 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, also a record number. Yes, there is a lot of Israel hate and Islamist anti-Semitism, but there's not one day without conspiracy theories about globalists and Jews running the world by the far right. When Jews become targets, our whole civic immune system is failing. The Nuremberg Laws began with Jews, but they did not end there. They taught a nation to unlearn empathy. Nor is the trend purely national. Across Europe, support for far-right and nationalist parties has grown in recent years. In the 2024 European Parliament elections, nationalists and far-right parties advanced in several countries enough to jolt markets and politics and to prompt a snap parliamentary election in France. In the Netherlands, a right-wing coalition, including Geert Wilders' PVV, took office in July 2024 under Prime Minister Dick Schoof, pledging the strictest ever asylum regime. These are democratic outcomes. They must be debated and contested democratically. But let us be clear-eyed about the direction of this development. When mainstream politics adopts the frames and fears of the fringe, the center of gravity moves and minorities pay first. Still, the last years also show something else. Democratic forces at work. Millions of Germans marched to defend constitutional dignity. Courts and ministries have acted against extremist networks and propaganda outlets. Civil society has expanded support for those targeted by hate. In July 2024, the Federal Interior Ministry banned the extremist magazine Compact and associated structures as an anti-constitutional organization, an action later suspended by a court pending appeal. The case illustrates both the state's resolve and the checks and balances. We will not always agree on the tools, but we should acknowledge a republic that is trying to defend itself with the bounds of law. That is the only way worthy of our basic law, our Constitution. How then do we practice Nuremberg's lesson rather than merely reciting it? First, we defend equal citizenship in law and in culture. The Reich citizenship law taught us how easily formal status can be manipulated to exclude. Our answer is not only legal constitutional, though Article 1 of our basic law and our Constitution remains our compass. It says human dignity is indivisible, protecting it is the task of all state power. Rather, it is a cultural as well, a shared stubborn insistence that citizenship is a promise we make to each other, not a prize some may be awarded and others may lose. The criteria for belonging in a democracy are commitment to the constitutional order and respect for others' rights. Nothing else to add. Second, we invest in truth. The new right rallies on narrative warfare, reframing reality until illusions feel like facts. We must expand media literacy and history education, support local journalism that can investigate, verify, and contextualize, and teach young people how propaganda works. The metapolitical strategy counts on slow corrosion, so too must our response rely on slow repair. Third, we enforce the law consistently and appropriately. Bans, surveillance, and prosecutions are not panaceas, and they carry risks. But democracies do have red lines, and crossing them should have consequences. That includes violence, intimidation, and organized attempts to dismantle the free, equal order. When we act, we must act with precision and transparency, knowing that legitimacy is our strongest shield. Hate and incitement are not protected opinions by the standards of our Constitution. Fourth, we stand with those targeted before they stand alone. The people most affected by hate should not be the ones most burdened to fight it. That means funding security for threatened institutions, ensuring rapid victim-centered reporting and response systems, and backing community organizations that build bridges across differences. When a synagogue needs protection, when a refugee center is harassed, when a politician is doxxed, the whole community should show up as if the insult were aimed at all of us, because it is. Fifth, we cooperate across borders. Right-wing extremist networks learn from each other and fund each other and launder in these across languages and platforms. Democracies must do the same, share intelligence, align platform accountability standards, and support comparative research into prevention. Nuremberg's legacy is international by definition, so must be our defense. As we mark the 19th anniversary of the Nuremberg Laws, let us observe a minute of silence for those who were humiliated, dispossessed, deported, and murdered under a code that called cruelty law. Thank you, my friends. Silence honors the victims. Speech serves the living. So let me end by speaking directly to the citizens of a free Germany and to our friends worldwide. When people tell you that equality is a threat to tradition, ask which tradition they mean. The Nuremberg Laws stood in a long, ignoble tradition of caste and cruelty. They were not a defense of German culture, but a betrayal of it. The most durable German tradition is not the one that built walls of blood. It is the one that rebuilt bridges after the rubble. When people tell you that fear requires surrendering rights, remember what happens when we award the state or a single party the power to decide who counts and what a human life is worth. The lesson of 1935 is that a law without conscience is a dangerous weapon. The lesson of the post-war years, 1945 and 1946, is that conscience can return to law if citizens demand it and institutions have the courage to respond. And sometimes you have to force them, like in Germany, which we should not forget. And when people say that history is past, remind them that anniversaries are not nostalgia. They are diagnostics. The numbers of anti-Semitism and extremist violence, the growth of exclusionary parties and narratives, and the mobilization of millions in defense of pluralism, these are the vital signs of our republics. They tell us where we're weak and where we're strong. They tell us when to worry and when to hope. Laws can be used to degrade and laws can be used to dignify. 90 years on, the choice is ours again, not only in courtrooms and parliaments, but in classrooms, newsrooms, living rooms, and the streets. Let us choose with clarity and courage the side of human dignity. Let us choose the lesson over the law that once profaned it. And let us be the citizens, the mothers and fathers of our constitutions believed we can be. Thank you for your attention.
As we come to the end of tonight's program, I would like to express our gratitude to Stephan Kramer for his eloquent and timely remarks that reminds us of the struggle for justice and freedom against racism and intolerance, a battle we must all fight every day. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight, the International March of the Living, the Miller Center at Rutgers University, and of course JNS, Jewish News Syndicate, for hosting this program and bringing it to its considerable audience. When like-minded organizations like these come together in support of a common cause, we are all the much better for it. And finally, before I thank each of you in the audience for taking your time to educate yourselves about this significant historical event in the history of the Jewish people and the lessons to be learned from the Holocaust, let me share with you that 10 years ago, at the March of the Living, in partnership with the Reuel Wallenberg Center, in partnership with Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, the March of the Living put together an outstanding program called the Nuremberg Symposium. I had the privilege of chairing that program along with the esteemed Erwin Kotler and Alan Dershowitz. We brought together Supreme Court justices from around the world. We brought together key figures from around the world to Poland, near Auschwitz, for the purpose of teaching the lessons of the Nuremberg Laws and the Nuremberg trials. We then published that symposium with Loyola University Law School in California. This is the volume that they published, volume 39, special edition, The Nuremberg Laws and the Nuremberg Trials. Why do I share this with you? One must wonder, are there people around the world interested in studying these historical issues? The answer is yes. More than 23,500 people have downloaded this volume from more than 50 countries around the world. What does it tell us? It tells us not only that there's an interest in Holocaust studies, not only an interest in learning the lessons of the Nuremberg race laws, but also an interest in the justice that came from the Nuremberg trials. We commend to each of you not just this volume. We commend to each of you the lessons to be learned, because unfortunately, they're even more important today than they were 10 years ago and when they were at the time. Because 90 years ago, when the Nuremberg race laws were enacted, most people didn't care. Most people didn't do anything about it. And we are all paying the price today. So in the hopes that the promise of never again will one day indeed become a reality, let me close by saying to you, that will only happen if you and I, the March of the Living, and all of those watching here tonight, stand up, speak out, be counted, and make sure that the lessons are not just lessons of history, but that they are lessons of instruction for today. We will change the future only by changing our conduct and by living life a better way with greater respect for all people. To all of you watching tonight who are about to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, we wish you Shana Tova and a Happy New Year, and to all of our viewers, we wish you a good night, and we thank you on behalf of the International March of the Living, and on behalf of the Rutgers Miller Center, and on behalf of JNS, we thank you for joining us.